This is Pivot Perspectives with Chris O'Byrne, the show that takes you around the world to share interviews with some of the most successful and relevant people on the planet. Hear their stories and get the most important business lessons they've learned on their road to success, and get exclusive access on how to implement their success into your life and business. Pivot Perspectives is brought to you by the Strategic Advisor Board and your host, Chris O'Byrne.
Hey, are you looking to scale your business from 5 figures to 6 figures or 6 figures to 7 figures? If you are, I have the perfect thing for you. What I want you to do today is I want you to go download a book. This book is going to take you through my 3-pillar system. It's 100% free. All you have to do is go to growfast.cash. I say again, go to growfast.cash, and you're going to be able to download my free international best-selling book, which is called Be Good, Be Brief, Be Gone. You can take that book. It's going to help you scale your business to the next level. Again, go download it. Be Good, Be Brief, Be Gone. growfast.cash. I say again, growfast.cash. Enjoy.
Mitchell Clionsky, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here, Chris.
So I would like to find out what led you to where you are now, where you're focusing on dementia. And I have a feeling you've been focusing on this for a long time, but I am curious of how your path led you here.
It's been really interesting from a couple of perspectives. Professionally, what happened was that I've been practicing as a neuropsychologist. So that means my background is as a PhD, doctorate of psychology, and then working with people on a wide range of problems, mostly emotional problems, but also cognitive problems, thinking problems. And I found that early in my career, when there weren't a lot of other neuropsychologists, I was asked to see people for a whole variety of reasons. I became increasingly more interested as more and more people were suffering from dementia. It's really a disease of aging. So as the population has gotten healthier and grown older, the numbers of people presenting with later life problems in thinking has increased. And I found it to be an ever-changing, ever-growing source of interest professionally and an opportunity to help people in a lot of ways, especially in the 1990s when they first came out with some of the currently available medications to treat the symptoms and slow down the progression of decline in dementia. So I went from a position of testing people, telling them what the diagnosis was, which was usually not a good diagnosis. It was usually something like Alzheimer's disease or vascular dementia or dementia due to Parkinson's disease, for example. It's a whole variety of dementias. And then sort of rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, as they say. We were watching people get worse. And I was there mostly for tracking that and helping them to make practical decisions like, can they drive a car? Can they live alone? Are they at risk of being financially taken advantage of? But when we came out with medications that could make a difference, my focus changed a lot in terms of what can we do now to try to intervene at an earlier stage and try to stabilize people from getting worse. That became even more interesting when I got together with my wife, my current wife, Emily, who's a physician, internal medicine doctor, went back and got a second residency in psychiatry and neurology, and really focuses on dementia and cognitive impairment because she brought a range of medical directives, medical findings, medical things to look for that made what I was doing even more complex and interesting. So that I see other cases. I see ADHD. I see people with concussions a lot. I see a variety of things like multiple sclerosis. But the thing that really, I think, intrigues me more than anything else is dementia. And then my mother came down with dementia. About the year 2000 is when we really put the pieces together and realized that those moments of confusion that she was having under stress and when she was tired and the kind of mistakes she was making really meant more than just everyday growing older at age 70 kind of problems, and got her to a doctor who diagnosed her with dementia, more of a vascular dementia in her case, where there's a circulatory kind of underpinnings to this. But I saw it from the other side as well. I saw it from the caregiver side. I saw it from the same position my patients' families are in. And I really became much more interested in finding everything we could do to both slow this down, but even more importantly, so we could prevent this from happening to people in the future. And that's really become my passion at this point, as well as Emily's passion, is the whole idea of dementia prevention.
Have you noticed an increase in the number of people with dementia percentage-wise?
Yes, and largely because of the baby boom. We see people, because of the influx, or not the influx, but the number of people born in my generation who are now in their 70s and early 80s, post World War II babies, are now that same, population bulge is now entering an age where they're more prone to dementia. The statistics tell us that if you're in your mid 60s, you only have about a 10% chance of having a dementia. When you get to be in your mid 70s, that doubles. So you get to be about 20% likely. And if you are lucky enough to live to mid 80s, the rate becomes 40%. So by keeping people healthier longer, both by reducing accidental injuries and treating and managing problems and curing cancers in many cases, we are creating more of a problem, what they call the silver tsunami, because we're having more and more balding and gray-haired people who are now experiencing memory loss.
Um, are there, how do I word this? Are there often environmental causes to dementia, or is it primarily, DNA, nature versus nurture?
The genetic parts of it are not as big as most people worry about. It's funny. For one thing, we distort the percentages when we think about the genetics. So I have people all the time, they say, well, my mom had dementia. And I said, well, was she the only child in the family? And they said, no, she's one of five. And I say, great. How about the other four? And they say, no, they're fine. I say, so she's got a 20% chance. That's the population statistic. In fact, she's now 80. So it's actually less than the population statistic. Having said that, there are some families in which there are very much early onset dementias. We're talking about people losing memory and cognition in their 50s. But these tend to be really well-established, well-known clusters of people, oftentimes with genetic backgrounds from particular regions. For example, there's some places in Mexico and Guatemala where there are valleys, and everyone in the valley marries their second cousin. And those are there, they're genetic. There's no grandparents without dementia because of the high incidence. And there's some other dementia related or dementia forms like Huntington's disease, which are 50% inheritable. But for most people, it is lifestyle and to some extent external factors, including environment. We now know that early life exposure to stress, to poverty, to air pollution increases the chance of dementia. We know that if you drop out of school early, you have less cognitive reserve as you get older. So you have less sort of bench strength. The first string gets tired. There's nobody sitting on the bench to come in. And those people are more likely to get dementia. We know that there are a number of medical conditions and some things that we do to ourselves, including smoking and alcohol abuse, and even some of the over the counter medications we take that all increase our risk of getting dementia. And those are the things we can do a lot about.
Okay, so that brings up a couple questions, and it's also encouraging to know that we have some control over the process. Um, so one question then is, what can we do to help prevent dementia?
Well, we wrote a whole book on that because it's not just one thing, it's a whole variety of things. And there's a whole model that we build on chapter by chapter in the book that talks about these various factors. I'll be happy to highlight them, but it's complex. So the one question that I dread when people ask me is, so doctor, what's the one thing I can do to dramatically change my risk for this? And I say, buy the book. Because that'll give you all the things that you need to do. There isn't one thing. If there were, don't you think we would have figured it out already? If there were one chemical or one behavior habit or one food that made a real difference, we're not stupid. We would have figured it out by now. This is not a new problem. The fact that we continue to have a growing rate of dementia is due to the fact that we're aging, but also that it's a complexity of factors. So we have to look at this in non-simplistic, non-headline grabbing kinds of ways. But the good news is, if you go about it that way, you can reduce your risk by 50%, which is huge. If we had a medication that cured 50% of dementias, that would be a stock that you would not be able to buy except in fractional shares because the cost of the stock would be so high. People would be lined up for blocks to get whatever it was that did this just because of how important it is. Unfortunately, prevention doesn't get the headlines. Prevention doesn't get
Yeah.
people's excitement. It's not sexy, but it's really worthwhile, a lot cheaper. And in general, even if you end up not fully effectively reducing your risk, you're going to be healthier in the process of doing it.
Yes. So this next question, you just got me thinking when we were talking about medications and environment. Are there any correlations between THC and dementia, either positive or negative?
Wow, great question and a real unknown at this point because, most of the research on marijuana, cannabis products, was completely suspended for decades. And so now we have sort of gotten the cart ahead of the horse a little bit. We've decriminalized, then we've medicationalized, and now we've recreationalized marijuana in a lot of states, including the one I live in. So there's a lot of people who I see, and I never used to ask the question of people over the age of 60 as to whether or not they used cannabis products, but now I ask everyone. And I find that there are a number of people who have started using marijuana in various forms, including edibles, including flower that they smoke, including tinctures, including pills, all kinds of different ways that used to use marijuana back in the 70s. What they don't, so I asked the follow-up question, which is, what percentage THC is your marijuana? And they look at me like, what do you mean? And I said, well, there's a THC component to this. What's the percentage of THC? And they don't know. I know from researching it that the general thing that you buy over the counter is 18 to 30% THC. Now, the marijuana back in the 70s was on average about 4% THC.
Yes.
So when you have 20-year-olds smoking 4% THC or 70-year-olds smoking 18 to 30% THC, you're bound to have some problems just because of the math.
Yes.
Does this cause dementia? I don't know, and I don't think anyone does. I do know that
Yeah.
temporarily it reduces our processing speed. That's been demonstrated. It reduces our ability to pay attention. It reduces the scores on the tests that I give people. And the question is, how much of a difference? So there's a lot of times when I'll be seeing someone who uses it nightly for sleep, or they use it for pain control on a daily basis. Some of the people I see get up in the morning and they say, I'm retired. And they start using it in the morning and throughout the day. They're just constantly high. And I say, I don't really know whether what you've got now is the beginnings of dementia, the state we call mild cognitive impairment, or whether you're just constantly stoned, at least to a mild degree. Let's do an experiment. Let's see what you're like after a couple months, maybe even just 30 days of not using it. You tell me subjectively over that period of time how your thinking is. And you may find that what you're experiencing is, wow, I'm a lot clearer now. I'm able to remember. I'm not going into the room and forgetting so much where I left my coffee cup or why I went in here or where I'm going today. Your organization might be better. Who knows? You may even listen better to your spouse because you're more focused. And then we'll see. So it's an interesting experiment, sort of like dry Januaries that people do when they're thinking about what
Ah,
effect does alcohol have on me.
yes. Yeah. Yeah. So even if it doesn't hurt or harm, it at least emulates in many cases. How do other, like over the, not over the counter, but prescribed medications, how well do the medications that are being used today work?
Well, medications is such a broad category that it really depends on what kinds. So let me take a couple kinds and talk about this. First of all, we've got medications that help to treat dementia. So I'm going to put those aside because I don't think that's what you're asking about. I think you're asking about medications for other conditions. But I'll,
Well, medications that are specifically prescribed to help people with dementia.
oh, okay, sure. No, I now understand the question. Okay, so since the 1990s, there have been four medicines that are on the market. Three of them come from one class of medications. These are medications that used to be known as Aricept and Razodine and Exelon. So if you're from back in those days, having a relative, that's one of the medications they probably took. These medications are now known by their generic names, donepezil, rivastigmine, and galantamine. They all work to help maintain a chemical in our brain that's called acetylcholine. Acetylcholine helps to carry information from one brain cell to all the brain cells around it. Because, as most people don't understand, the neurons, the brain cells that carry information, which sort of look like, if you imagine pulling out a sapling in winter from the ground, it's got this long, skinny stem and lots of roots and lots of branches. And you lay these end to end so that information goes in through the roots, gets sent out through the branches after traveling up the stem. There's a space between the branches of every nerve cell and the roots of the surrounding nerve cells. This is technically called a synapse. In order for synaptic transmission, for information to get from one nerve cell to the ones around it, in these billions and billions of nerve cells laid out in tracks and various networks, we have to use chemical messengers. Well, one of those messengers that's really important for memory is acetylcholine. As we age, the levels of acetylcholine in our brain go down just normally, and we have fewer endpoints and fewer roots. So fewer branches and fewer roots in order to send and receive those. We can't put in more acetylcholine. What we can do, though, is help to support the available acetylcholine by keeping it active just a little bit longer in the synapse and the postsynaptic area. So more information then ordinarily we'll get across from one to the other, which is why these medications are real good for maintaining current levels, but not real good for improving cognition. And that's one of the real mistakes that happens is doctors in many cases, as well as patients, expect an improvement. So they start someone on one of these medicines, and a month or two later they say, "Are you doing better?" "Nah, not really." Family says, "No, not really." And then they'll say, "Well, maybe you don't need it. Let's discontinue it." I view that as a major mistake. No news is good news in the world of memory disorders. Not getting worse is a good outcome from a progressive condition that gets worse. So if we can keep you where you are, the whole goal then is to get you in earlier so that we identify this at the earliest possible stage. There's another medication from a different class, used to be called Namenda. Now it's called memantine, works in a different way, works on the specific area of the nerve cell called the NMDA receptor site. It has a more general effect than the other medicines do. It also has some neuroprotective value to help keep the nerves intact longer into the future. The ideal combination for most people is when they're on one of each type of medication together. So if we can get people up at therapeutic levels of both medications, I have a lot of patients who cognitively are no different 5 years later from the day they walked in our door. And I view that as a real success.
Yeah, yeah, I can. That, absolutely, that perspective is uh, good to keep in mind because you don't think that way. We think in terms of we take a medicine to help improve our situation in whatever way that is. As as somebody who has learned a lot about cognition and cognitive psychology along the way, as well as the physical aspects of what's going on, have you learned about helping people, not necessarily from with dementia, but helping people to think better, to focus better?
Looking to grow your business beyond 5 figures, 6 figures, 7 figures plus, what I want you to do is go download this book. The title is called Be Good, Be Brief, Be Gone. It will help you grow your business past 5, 6, and 7 figure. Go download the book today. Growfast.cash. I say again, growfast.cash, and download the book for absolutely free.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that we can do to eliminate some of the things that are getting in the way of focusing. So, for example, hearing loss is a big one. And it's an increasingly prevalent kind of problem as we age because people of my generation now in their 70s have been exposed to a lot of background noise through machinery, airplanes, noise on the street, rock and roll. We've had a lot of things that have been impacting our hearing that previous generations, unless they worked at a factory or some other kind of heavy construction area, may not have experienced. We now know that hearing loss not only is a cause for dementia and that treating the hearing loss can improve cognition, we also know that people who don't hear so well tend to withdraw, don't pay good attention, have problems because they misunderstand what other people tell them. They don't get the joke because it's subtle humor and they don't get
Right.
the point. So that's one thing we can do that's really helpful. Helping to diagnose and treat background emotional conditions. If you find somebody who doesn't pay good attention, there's a decent chance that they're anxious or depressed. And if you more effectively treat that, you're able to improve their attention paying. Same way with people who have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So over the same point of my career, we've gotten to know a lot more about ADHD. And while we know that about half of the people outgrow their ADHD as they go through adolescence and into adulthood. The other 50% don't. So we see a lot of people as adults who have never been diagnosed because it was not such a big thing back when they were in school. But you take a history, you have them fill out some checklists, and it's pretty clear that this is somebody who's never paid attention really well and has had to compensate for that problem throughout their life. In many cases, they can still be treated with the kind of medications that are used to treat ADHD. As long as they don't have significant cardiovascular disease, oftentimes they can take stimulant medications and do really well with them, and it makes them alert. It helps them to focus better, and it's a really good kind of solution where the problem is not memory, the problem is attention.
You talked about it. You've noticed that there is a correlation between certain types of stress and dementia. And have you noticed a correlation with mindset and dementia?
Well, we have had some recent research showing that optimism is a really important kind of mindset to have to help with almost any disease, including dementia. People who are naturally optimistic tend to have lower rates of dementia. We also find that you can teach through things like cognitive behavioral therapy, other forms of therapy, you can teach optimism. You can teach people to change their approach so that they're less likely to naysay. They're less likely to view things as going downhill. They're less likely to think that the world is coming to an end and everything is horrible around them, even though there's people perhaps in their environment, both personally and politically, who are telling them that things are horrible. And that's not good for us. It actually is not good for us to have that kind of mindset. It increases our levels of stress. It puts wear and tear on our vascular system so that we're more likely to have breakdowns in the blood flow that gets to our heart and to our brain. None of that's good for our body. If you're in a constantly adrenalized state of, oh my God, things are horrible around me, what am I going to do? That doesn't bode well for being motivated to exercise, which we know is really positive for brain health. It doesn't bode well for us wanting to interact with other people. We just hibernate, we pull back, we withdraw, and we stay depressed. We know that depression is a cause for dementia as well. So mindset does play a part, and it can be changed. And sometimes people need a helping hand from psychopharmacology, because while their acetylcholine levels that we talked about get lower as they age, so do their serotonin levels. Serotonin is an important chemical transmitter, as is norepinephrine, for mood states. So some people, as we get older, we become more prone to depression. So some of it's chemical, some of it's realistic, just the fact that we suffer more losses. We see family members and friends die. We have physical things that get in the way of hobbies and activities that we used to enjoy. Growing older is not for babies. It really is tough.
So let's talk about the book that you and Emily have written, Dementia Prevention, Using Your Head to Save Your Brain. I love that subtitle. Just talk to me about that. How did that come about, and how has that been helping people?
It's a book that we wrote to pull together diverse threads of knowledge and science. So we wanted a book that was going to be very scientific, but wouldn't read like a scientific book. That was the important thing, because we're sort of fed up with fads. We're fed up with the ads we see on TV where there's a jellyfish component that can make your memory better, or you can cram all the vegetables and fruits that you need into 3 capsules. And man, if you take those, you feel better. We're tired of those kind of things. Here, eat a half a cup of this berry and it's going to make a difference. Tired of the diet and recipe books for Alzheimer's because, frankly, they just don't work. So we went about this from a perspective of gathering information about dementia from all the different areas that impact dementia. What you find out, there's a lot of them. Not only is there neurology and psychiatry and psychology, but because diabetes is such a big factor, you have to look at the endocrinology literature. Because sleep apnea is a big factor, you have to look at pulmonology and sleep medicine. Because internal medicine and cardiology are huge factors, you have to look at all the stuff dealing with hypertension, atrial fibrillation, strokes. You have to look at all of that because that's all going to bear on what's going on, not to mention the genetics and the exercise physiology and the audiology for the hearing questions. So we went about pulling all of this together and doing a real deep dive in a very broad way on all of these factors, and then constructing what is probably the first and only comprehensive model. We have 25 different factors. 20 different factors. We have 25 questions that we use to assess these, but we have basically 20 factors in our model. Now, the previous models that have found a 40 to 60% reduction in dementia have only 12 factors. We think there's more than that. We think that we can actually do even a better job than reducing our risk by 50%. But that's where we started. And then we wanted to translate this science, not dumb it down, but translate it into language so that you felt like you were sitting in a room talking with us, just like we're doing right now. So we would explain things like I did with acetylcholine. So we would explain why these various factors interact. And then to present this step by step, chapter by chapter, into building this model so you could follow along, see how this all fit together. And then we have in there a questionnaire that's also on our website called braindoc.com. And this is a free questionnaire. You can either download it, fill it out, or fill it out online. And you go through 25 questions that will tell you where you're on track, where you're off track, or where you're sort of near to being on target. That's the beginning of making a plan to change your risk, because otherwise it's just sort of mental theory. The real purpose of this book is to arm people with tools that they can use to decide, I'm going to make a change for the better in my health. Here's how I'm going to do it. And the last 3 chapters of the book are all about the process of change and using psychology to make change easier. So that's what we put together. That's the whole idea. It came out a year ago. And so far, the response has been really positive. And I love it when people tell me, I read your book, here's what I've done. And that's really a rewarding kind of thing.
So I'm looking at the checklist right now, and one of the factors is non-prescription sleep medications. Tell me more about that.
Great
I would
question.
not have thought of that as a factor.
So it's one of the areas of what we call anticholinergic burden. And remember a couple of minutes ago, I was talking about you taking medicines to keep your levels of acetylcholine up. That's what all those 3 medical medications are about. Those are procholinergic. Well, there's also medications which are anticholinergic, which deplete our brains of acetylcholine. The over-the-counter sleep aids are one of those types of medicines. All the stuff with the PM at the end, if you look at the label, it contains diphenhydramine, otherwise known as Benadryl. So we have those. By themselves, maybe not a big deal, but you add to it the cold medications that you take, the anti-allergy medications that you take, which also contain similar chemicals.
Right.
Maybe your sleep is disrupted because you have to get up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and you're complaining to your doctor. Doctor says, I got a medicine for that. And they give you a medicine like oxybutynin, otherwise known as ditropan, or a medication of that same class. That's also anticholinergic. Maybe the heart medicine you're taking and need to take is anticholinergic. Maybe the antidepressant you're on is anticholinergic. So now you have this whole 1+1 = 3 or 4 kind of thing, which is why in our questionnaire, which you can also link to directly, is what they call an anticholinergic burden calculator. This is online, not developed by us, developed by some doctors in the UK. They gave us permission to use this and link to it. But here you can put in each of the medicines that you take, either prescription or non-prescription, and it'll tell you what the score is for that medication. Now, it doesn't calculate the totals. You have to use a paper and pencil to write them all down. But you'll get to a number, and then you start thinking, how do I lower my anticholinergic burden? Talk to your doctor before you stop any prescription medications. Your doctor may have alternatives that are much less centrally anticholinergic. They still work on your bladder in the way they should, but they don't hit those what they call anti-muscarinic receptor sites in your brain. So it's a technical thing, but don't stop those on your own. As for the sleep medications you're buying at the pharmacy, see if you can avoid taking those. Take a look at what's keeping you awake at night. What you might find is that you actually can fall asleep. You've gotten so used to taking them because tomorrow could be a big day that you're unnecessarily lowering your acetylcholine and sort of slowing your brain down. You don't need to do that.
That's a good point. What do you spend most of your time doing these days?
Motivating, persuading, using my tricks of the trade to get people to buy into an optimistic plan to make a change. I'm a big cheerleader. I love being able to say, okay, here's what you've told me. Here's when we put it into this formula, what you could do that would make a difference in your brain's future. Now let's talk about how to make a change. Because I'm all about change throughout the lifespan. One thing I've learned over the years is that any organism that stops changing, stops adapting, becomes extinct. And so we need to change throughout the course of our life because there are different challenges at every time in our life. And we meet a lot of people, they say, no, he'll never change. It's usually men. They talk to the wives, oh, he'll never change. He'll never do that. And I say, well, let me take a crack at him. Let me see if we can talk about why it is that he's doing this and doesn't think, obviously he's perfect, as both of us are. Obviously, because we're guys and we've grown up, we've figured it all out at this point. Well, I try to work with them into saying, yeah, well, you may be perfect, but here's some ways you could be even better than perfect.
What are the ways that you help people? You help people through knowledge. You give talks. You have your book. I'm assuming you're still a clinician. What do you do that that directly helps people?
I see 600 to 700 dementia patients a year. Every one of those patients gets an initial interview by me, followed by a test battery with one of my clinicians. We then put together a report. We analyze all the data. We compare their scores with how they should do for someone of their age and background. And then they come back 2 weeks later. I sit down, I go over the results, explain a treatment plan or an approach that I think will help them. And they get a report that they take with them that's identical to the report that goes to their doctors, as well as anyone else they want it to go to. That becomes our plan. Sometimes I see people once because they really are worried well. They're really just fine and they just need a little bit of a tune-up. Sometimes I only see them once because they've waited so long to come in that I can't do much for them at that point. But those are the extremes. Most of the people we see every 6 to 12 months after that, depending on how well they're doing, and we modify the treatment plan depending on new needs. So I think that it's those kind of discussions, but that's limited. It's the podcasts that I think are really one of the most important kinds of vehicles for me to be able to get a message out, because you reach, I don't know what your numbers are, but it's a lot more than I possibly could see. And if we can get those people who are listening to the podcast to borrow the book from the library if they can't afford it, it's only like $25 in paperback, but assuming they say, I'm just going to borrow it, fine. Get the information. We have other podcasts and articles on our website that they can also look at to glean some other ideas. But I really want people to say they want to make the next 10 to 20 years of their lives better than they would have been otherwise. That's my target audience.
Mm. I like that. So you don't keep very busy then with only 600 or so interviews and people to take care of and everything else on top of that.
That's the reach the larger, that's you talk about having your platform. And we went into this, Emily and I,
Yeah.
having zero platform. They say, well, what's your social media presence? I say, well, I've got a Twitter account that I have not posted anything on in the 10 years that I've had the account. Does that count? So well, that's not very much. You must have a lot of professional societies that you interact with all the time and give talks at conferences. I said, actually we don't. While we publish research, it's read by other researchers primarily. And most of our work is seeing patients. We don't go to a lot of conferences. So, well, you have to start developing a presence. I said, okay, great. How do you do that? And so that's what this has all been about. It was changing to figure out how it was growth. What we call developing neural networks is writing
Yes.
with your spouse. It's a stress test for marriage. Fortunately, we came out of it really well, but it had its moments.
Yeah. It's not a simple, easy process. So, what parting words of advice do you have for people?
I got a couple. Number one, I don't want people to be dementia worriers. We know that 80% of the people over the age of 50 have a moderate or greater degree of worry about dementia. And I say, I don't want you to be a dementia worrier. I want you to become a prevention warrior. I want you to do something, because worrying never helped. It doesn't motivate. It doesn't create. It doesn't make a difference, except it makes you miserable. Oftentimes it actually gets in the way of doing things because it bogs you down in anxiety. So I want people to examine as closely as possible where they are today. Take a real hard look at that. And that's why we have that tool that we've given them. And then to plot a course for change, to get help in changing where they can, from friends, from relatives, from their doctors, from a therapist or a life coach, and start to do something. If we could do that, it's going to make a huge change in the future for not just them, but of society, because the number of people that each case of dementia impacts is several people, family, caregivers,
Oh, yeah.
all kinds of folks, your kids. You don't want your kids to have to take care of you in that way. You want to be different. So that's the message. Do something. Learn and act.
Dr. Clionsky, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Hey, we all want to scale our business. Hey, I have the answer for you today to help you do that. If you're looking to scale from 5, 6, even 7 figures and beyond, book called Be Good, Be Brief, Be Gone. I'm going to give it to you for free. All you have to do is type in growfast.cash. I say again, growfast.cash, and you can download the book for absolutely free. I hope the book helps you this year. Take your business to the next level. Again, go grab the book, growfast.cash. I say again, growfast.cash. I wish you the best and grow, scale, and win.
Thanks for listening to Pivot Perspectives with your host, Chris O'Byrne. Please leave your feedback and visit strategicadvisorboard.com to get the latest and greatest business advice on the planet. Follow us on social media for updates, and we will see you on the next episode.